It begins, as many quiet revelations do, with a shape in the water that should not be this straight. Before we move, before we descend, even before breath begins to sink with tide, there is simply that. A suggestion of geometry beneath the blue, a line that lingers too long to be accidental, an edge that holds its poise the way a memory does when it's not quite ready to speak. A gentle one, but firm, not alarm, not spectacle, only the soft insistence of something carved-looking resting where carving should be impossible. And so we draw closer. The sea receives us with its usual courtesy. The surface is a trembling sheet of light, thin as breath, and the boat above us shifts as if nudging us forward. The evening air folds itself behind our shoulders, giving us that slight, ceremonial push found at the threshold of a library after hours. We lower ourselves, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the slow care of someone turning a fragile page. The first touch of water at the ribs is cool enough to make the lungs hesitate, then loosen. In that small loosening, the world above us falls away. We let our breathing join the sea's rhythm, steady and tidal, an inhale that widens the chest like a patient wave, an exhale that settles like sand. Light refracts around us through long, quiet pillars of blue. Each pillar is a window. Each window contains its own tiny weather. Drifting silt, slow-falling motes, salt snow. This is the atmosphere of Yonaguni, a place where everything moves, but nothing hurries. Ahead, the first terrace appears, not as a reveal, but as a clarifying. The shape we glimpsed from above becomes a procession of horizontal planes, each one a shallow step into deeper quiet. Some edges are astonishingly straight, as if trimmed by a hand that understood alignment. Others are softened by time, furred with living things that shimmer as we pass. We let our attention run along those edges, slowly, like fingertips over a familiar spine. There is a faint resistance where small organisms cling, a delicate roughness that belongs to centuries of tide, season, and patient erosion. Tiny sounds attend us, a shell rotating in a whisper of current, the soft scuff of a fish brushing a single grain of sand, a distant click from some industrious crustacean. These are not interruptions. They are the punctuation marks of the place. And now we speak plainly, softly, but plainly. We are at the Yonaguni Monument, off the island that shares its name, where a stepped formation interrupts the otherwise unremarkable seafloor. Here, geometry and geology share a long, ambiguous conversation, and we are invited to listen without rushing toward verdict or myth. For story is our instinct. But tonight, story is not a spear. It is a lantern. We hold it lightly, letting its small circle of illumination encourage careful seeing rather than conclusions. Think of each terrace as a page in a ledger written by pressure, storm, and time. Some pages are wild and free. Others bear straight, deliberate lines, as though someone, or something, once asked the rock to obey an angle, a channel, a square. We do not decide. We observe. Let us imagine placing our palms upon that first terrace. Cool stone meets warm thought. There is grit, the residue of ancient weather, a thin reminder that centuries settled differently on stone and on skin. Here, in this meeting of temperatures, the present feels brief, luminous, and kind. We listen to the monument as we would listen to an old friend who speaks rarely but never wastes a word. Consider the diver who first traced an edge here with startled fingertips. That single private moment became a slow river of questions, not sharp questions, but tender ones. Who shaped this? Did anyone? If hands were involved, what stories did those hands leave behind? If no hands touched it, what artistry can nature claim while we've been busy elsewhere? Tonight, we let such questions drift without anchoring them. Our job is attention, not verdict. Each detail becomes a soft bell rung once, allowed to fade naturally. We breathe with the tide. A slow inhale as a wave lifts somewhere above, a slow exhale as it falls, and the monument reveals itself in that breathing. Later, we will situate these terraces in longer timelines. Tectonics, sea level change, coastal erosion, storms that rewrote the coastline long before us. But that comes with patience. For now, we remain close. We remain companions to the stone. The terraces unfold beneath the muted melancholy of underwater blue. Light maps delicate cartographies across each plane, faint, shifting lines like the ghost of an old blueprint. And through it all, we do not hurry. We allow curiosity to soften rather than sharpen. Our attention is a small flame held far from wind, protective, steady, revealing only what is ready to be seen. We are here together. That is the essential fact. No spectacle, no haste, only the long, quiet descent into a place where the sea keeps both its geometry and its stories with equal gentleness. This is where we begin, with presence, with breath, with the first patient step down into the Yonaguni terraces. Together, we enter the room of memory with the measured step of someone who knows how to hold a candle without jostling the flame. In quiet catalogs, the past reads like a very patient hand. There is a simple geography to begin with. Yonaguni sits like a small, wind-etched punctuation off the west coast of Okinawa, and nearby, on a stretch of seabed, lie plains that stare themselves down into blue. We will not attempt grand declarations. Rather, we will set out what is known, what was noticed, and how the noticing itself became part of the story. The first public notes of the site date to the early 1980s, when local divers, and later, more systematic teams, began to observe forms that distinguished themselves from the surrounding seabed. One might suppose, at first hearing, that every coastline yields some surprise, and that is true. Yet surprises differ in the way they insist upon attention. Some sing for a moment and pass. Others, like Yonaguni, gather a small congregation of observers who return again and again. We follow those returns gently. Imagine an old study with salt on its windowsill, maps pinned, logs in a neat stack, instruments humming in the corner. The archival feel is not theatrical, it is practical. Divers kept careful notes. Photographers left strips of film. Professors carried home papers folded in their coats. The first snorkelers left small sketches in their journals. The first technical divers left down breaths of astonishment recorded on tape. These modest records are precious because they are patient. We take the timeline slowly. A fisherman finds a snag where his net will not behave as before. A diver surfaces with a photograph that seems, at first, only to show an oddly regular edge. Then more images arrive, more hands visit, and an object begins to assemble itself out of attention. There is a choreography to discovery that is mostly small and private. One person notices an angle, another notices a channel, a third remembers a stone step from a village quay. We honor these small moments. What is important about the 1980s moment is not glamour, but method. Cameras were simpler, sonar cruder, and yet the care taken by those first explorers was sincere. They recorded, they compared notes, and they argued politely, sometimes at length. Some called the forms natural, pointing to rock jointing and erosion patterns as slow artisans. Others observed regularity that suggested human shaping. The debates were never thunderous spectacles, but rather polite exchanges over cups of tea and wetsuits. We should touch, briefly, on the technical terms without letting them overtake our conversation. Jointing, bedding planes, lithology, terraces as geomorphic features. These terms are tools, like finely made keys, and they open certain doors in our understanding. Equally useful are the tools of the humanities. Comparison to coastal keys, to step temples carved elsewhere, to human gestures repeated across continents. Both sorts of tools are necessary. We use them with restraint. Listen for a moment to the sort of sounds that belong to this archival space. The turning of a notebook page, the soft cluck of a camera's mechanism, a distant ship bell marking the hour. These are the incidental instruments of study. They do not argue, they merely record. In our imagining, the sound of paper is as much a comfort as evidence, because it signals patience. We borrow that patience now. There is also a human geography to the story. Local islanders, researchers from abroad, occasional promenading tourists who see a photograph and wonder. Each brings a different relation to the place. Each leaves a different trace. Local fishermen told, in the beginning, quiet stories about tides that once ran differently, about banks that altered shape with season. Scientists brought measurements and models. Divers brought careful annotations and the particular language of breath held under blue. And often, before formal papers, there were evenings where a small group sat over tea and slides, watching images while the ocean hissed outside. Occasionally, a scholar will offer a somewhat theatrical aside. It is possible that, and then close the thought with a smile. One of the gentler rules of studying places like this is to remain explicit about uncertainty. We will do the same. We will present possibilities in the temperate tone of someone describing weather rather than crime. This might be so, and this might be otherwise. Both statements can be true in a long view. The pleasure is not in choosing sides, but in enlarging the circle of attention. As we close this section, rest your shoulders downward and feel the small invitations of the body. The crown of your head softens, your jaw loosens, and your hands go slack. Let the scholar's slow inhalation mirror your breath for a few cycles. We will carry this gentle framework forward, a flat map of facts, threads of observation, and the kindly skepticism that keeps wonder honest. When we next speak, we will stand nearer to the stones themselves and allow their edges to tell their quiet part of. The terraces lay before us like a patient sentence, each step a clause that waits to be read. We approach not as jurors, but as readers, circling a text whose ink is seawater and whose margins are tides. There are several ways to speak of origins, and we will offer three kindly, companionable hypotheses, not to end argument, but to widen it. One is the patient return. A coastline that once bore habitation slowly surrendered to rising seas, and human shaping remained as a faint grammar beneath new currents. Another is the sudden inlet, an abrupt rearrangement of shore and sand that folded a human place into water in a single, surprising motion. The third is the slow undoing of nature, jointing and erosion, which can sculpt regularity from generosity. We begin with the patient return. Imagine a shore with quays and stepped platforms, a place where feet once learned the cadence of stones. Over years of tides and storms, the sea claims those margins. Terraces that were deliberately cut become submerged terraces that look much like those cut by water alone. In this view, the monument is memory wearing a new garment. Traces of human arranging persist under algal veils and incrustation. We feel, in this hypothesis, a deep tenderness. Human hands made a place, and the sea kept it, as one keeps a folded letter. The sudden inlet hypothesis offers a different mood, a quick, astonished swallowing of land, an event that rearranges lives in a single night. There are geologies that favor abrupt change, sink, subsidence, the shifting of a channel, and in such cases a built place might become submerged rapidly. If one imagines this, our attention moves from slow acclimation to intimate shock. Objects left where people left them, a ledger on a table, a toy at a doorway, artifacts that still belong to a last moment. The mood here is small and stunned, a room still warm after the household has gone. The third idea, the slow undoing, is the view of patient geology. Rock is patient in ways that resemble slowness rather than intention. Fractures widen, layers detach along planes. Wave action accentuates joints until terraces appear. In this telling, the stepping is a natural architecture, and our tendency to see design is the mind finding pattern in generous stone. There is beauty in that mechanical artistry. It is not less poetic for being non-human. Each hypothesis carries a small resonance of loss. The patient return asks us to grieve for the passing of gardens and hearths. The sudden inlet asks us to mourn the abruptness of leaving. The slow undoing asks us to consider the sublime indifference of time. We hold these moods gently. They are not accusations, but invitations. We must also allow the monument to speak in its own acoustic. Walk with me along the nearest terrace. We move slowly, and underfoot the silt gives a soft, patient sound, like paper settling. A channel runs close by, its edges beveled with a regularity that makes us pause. Do we read that bevel as a tool mark or as a fracture smoothed by long tides? Both readings sit beside one another comfortably. In the dimness, a small fish shoals and then disperses. The movement is like punctuation, a soft comma. There are intimate moments of imagined loss we can name. A rope coiled in a corner that no longer needs to bind. A clay cup overturned and filled with silt. A child's carved toy half buried in a sheltered niche. These images are domestic rather than theatrical. They ask us for sympathy rather than scandal. When we imagine the thumb-marked peg, we imagine the thumb pausing on a day that later became a season. The peg survives like a note folded inside a book. Clark would remark, with that companionable dryness, that certainty is often an affectation of the impatient. We therefore fold our hypotheses into careful description, angles that are too straight to ignore, channels that suggest intention, joints that could be either. We let the evidence be a cluster of small lights rather than a single beacon. We listen to each light and do not hurry past them. There is, too, a pleasure in ambiguity. To hold more than one story is to feel a place more richly. It is to allow both human tenderness and geological grandeur to inhabit the same set of stones. The ziggurat motif, layers ascending toward what would once have been a sky, insists that human imagination has always found ways to stack meaning. Whether those layers were placed by hands or carved by the sea, they remain an architecture of intention or of appearance so convincing it becomes habit for the eye. We step, in thought, into an inner chamber the terraces imply, a recessed hollow, half filled with soft silt and a folded hush of water. The sound there is quieter still. Speech returns as an echo of our own company. In that chamber we find a single small thing, a carved peg no larger than a thumb, its edges worn, its surface scalloped by salt. It could be a child's toy or a peg from a chest. Either way it is ordinary. The object matters less than the act of finding, whether it belonged to a hand that left in haste or to a household that thinned over seasons. The peg gives weight to our tenderness. Imagine a thumb pausing on it. The sea cooled it and kept it. We hold that image without asking for proof. And so the questions remain: patient return, sudden inlet, or slow undoing. Each carries its own music of loss and patience. We let the music play as we breathe and listen to the terraces in different architecture. We end this section with a small, embodied cue. Feel the soles of your feet against whatever surface supports you. Notice the warmth there and imagine it fading into a coolness that mirrors the stone beneath our imagined toes. Let your shoulders unhook slightly, and with that small unhooking, let your breath grow longer. We have placed several modest maps on the table of possibility. We carry them forward not to solve, but to keep company. We come now to a chapter of small recognitions, those proximal moments when the world shifts its weight by the width of a fingertip. Consider how discoveries begin, with an obstinate net, a camera that clicks, a machine that hums, and a single human reaching to touch. The first accounts, as history prefers to record them, are modest in manner. A fisherman, hauling a net one morning, feels an unexpected snag. There is a curious resistance, as if the ocean floor has offered a hand. He draws up the webbing and finds it not torn but knotted around something just beneath the surface. and thus the attention is invited. The snag is small and practical, but it is a beginning that makes the world larger. We imagine the tug of the net, the gloved palm working patiently to free the mesh, the salt spray that tastes like a sentence unfinished. Soon after come images, a strip of film, a grainy photograph, a diver's slide that captures an angle a single mind would otherwise have missed. Cameras change the scale of wonder. They allow private astonishment to become public curiosity. We picture a first photograph, developed on a bench, light spilling like a hush across its surface, and a pair of hands turning it slowly. The image cannot command answers, but it can instruct attention. Not long after the camera comes the mechanical ear of modern discovery. Sonar sweeps paint the sea floor in bands of light and dark. A blip on a screen is translated into a suggestion of shape. The blip is abstract, a digital punctuation. Yet for those trained to read such markings, it resolves into terraces, into planar steps that demand closer looking. We sense the quiet hum of the machine in the background. Fans turning, processors cycling, a technician's idle breath. Machines have their own small acoustics, and they lend a new register to old places. Diver's reach follows, as it must. A human body, buoyant and deliberate, extends a gloved hand to the stone and feels with the tips of fingers. Here we privilege tactile astonishment, the slight give of silt, the sand that slips like a held silence, the tiny barbs of encrusting life against skin. There is a particular astonishment that belongs to touch. It differs from sight because it involves weight and temperature and immediate feedback. When a diver, in that first close encounter, runs their hand along an edge and feels what the eye had only implied, the moment folds into a private ledger of knowing. Modern rediscovery brings laboratory textures too. We picture a lab table where a printout lies under a bright lamp. A sonar readout is pinned like a specimen. A small rock sample fits beneath the careful eye of a microscope. There is the soft, industrious noise of instrumentation, a centrifuge that whirs faintly, a printer that sighs as it completes a page, the distant drone of climate control. Such noises are the quieter, domestic machinery of science, and they give a human scale to otherwise immense processes. Photographs are pinned, notes circled, and slowly a composite sense of the place emerges from many tiny acts of attention. And then there are public walks and the slow sharing of images, lectures where slides are shown, shallow documentaries that whisper more than they shout, evenings when a small crowd gathers at a harborside cafe to watch a projected image. We imagine these public moments not as spectacles, but as communal remembering, maps passed between hands, the soft murmur of discussion, the occasional laugh that breaks like a small wave. Public attention is a kind of social breath. It expands the discovery into a shape that can be collectively held. In the midst of instruments and public rooms, there remain private discoveries that feel sacred in their restraint. I think of a diver who, upon kneeling beside a terrace, finds a tiny carved peg caught in a crevice. The diver lifts it and, without fanfare, places it in the pocket of a wetsuit to study later. On returning to shore, he holds the peg under a lamp, tracing its worn ridges with the tip of a forefinger, offering a small, private gratitude for the ordinary object that lives inside extraordinary stone. That tenderness is discovery reduced to humility. We should pay attention to the acoustics of discovery. The net's sudden pull, the camera's soft click, the sonar's measured ping, the diver's gentle exhale as hands meet stone, the lab's faint electronic whir. These sounds can be assembled into a quiet symphony of noticing. When mixed low beneath a warm voice, they become the narrative's heartbeat. Let us add a small, bodily cue here. Feel the length of your arms as you rest them by your sides. Notice the slow, even rise of your chest. Imagine, for a moment, the diver's gloved hand meeting stone, Imagine that sensation traveling across your skin like a remembered pressure. With that imagined contact, let one slow exhalation release a little more tension from the shoulders. Rediscovery also brings a gentle humility. Machines and cameras and charts can point, but they do not mandate belief. The scientist's printout may show a terrace, and the diver's hand may feel a right angle. Yet interpretation remains an act of translation between modalities: sight, touch, measurement. We allow each mode its authority while keeping our own curiosity unpossessed. Finally, there is a tenderness in the small gestures of modern care. A conservator's gloved handling of a pebble, the precise notation on a lab sheet, a diver returning to a site with a bouquet of gratitude rather than conquest. Discovery need not be an act of taking. It can be an act of remembering, of reshelving what has always been there into an awareness that is kinder and more patient. We end this section with the image of an evening walk along the harbor after a day of dives. Instruments put away, lights soft, the sea breathing steadily against the quay. Let us feel, once more, the gentle anchoring of our own bodies. Press the soles of your feet into the surface beneath you, unclench the jaw, and take 3 slow breaths as if each one were a small tide. We carry forward the textures of modern rediscovery with hands that remain gentle. There is a particular tenderness in considering human hands as makers. It is a way of honoring attention and intention. We speak now of the possibility that the terraces are not only memory but workmanship, that someone once chose angles and laid planes with a patience akin to the seas. Begin with small gestures of craft, a chisel tapping, a hand feeling for level, a row of stones laid as one lays the frames of a door. Imagine a quay where boats tie and children run, where steps allow the lifting of baskets and the careful lowering of amphorae. These are gestures of use as much as of design. We let these ordinary acts take weight in our thoughts, not as proofs, but as humane possibilities. Architectural echoes come kindly to our aid. Across many coasts, humans have made terraces and platforms, stepped quays, seawalls, rice terraces, ceremonial steps, ways of negotiating edge and tide. When we compare the monument to such structures, we do so with a soft curiosity rather than an accusatory gaze. The resemblance is not a verdict. It is an invitation to imagine hands making margins with tools both rough and tender. Consider the texture of a tool mark, a faint groove where a scraper has passed, a rounded corner where repeated touch has smoothed an angle, a channel cut to guide water. These microsignatures are subtle. They are not dramatic proclamations, but patient annotations. If such marks exist on these terraces, they would speak not of great monuments alone, but of daily life, of quays where fish were salted, of platforms where cloth was beaten, of thresholds that guided feet. We keep these imagined functions doing their quiet work in our minds and do not hurry them along. There is also the matter of proportion. Human-made structures often show a scale that responds to the body, a step sized for a foot, a ledge intended for a sitting thigh. When divers describe terraces that could be traversed comfortably, our imagination supplies a village rhythm: children stepping, elders pausing, market-goers bearing loads. This bodily scale is a humane proof of sorts. It is not conclusive, but it persuades by sympathy. Material choices matter too. Stone that cleaves cleanly invites shaping. Certain sandstone or volcanic rock can be dressed with relative ease compared to harder lithologies. If hands once shaped these forms, they would have worked with what the shore offered, choosing planes that lent themselves to incision and smoothing. The idea is not of monumental hubris, but of practical making. Platforms for boats, seats for ceremonies, foundations for storerooms. We imagine these industrious acts as softly as one imagines an old stitch being repaired. We must not romanticize tools. Tool work leaves a grammar that is readable, but it can also be altered by water and time. Edges become softened, faces become patinated, grooves gather life. Hence the scholar's caution. To read tool work requires patience and a certain humility. We say this in order to preserve a generous openness to interpretation. The presence of human scale proportion and residual marks should invite further study rather than immediate celebration. Cultural analogs offer gentle counsel. Look to stepped islands where terracing serves ritual or agriculture, to coastal towns where stone is co-opted for both harbor and temple, to distant shores where similar forms respond to similar practicalities. These analogs are conversation partners. We place them beside Yonaguni not to force likeness, but to widen the set of possible stories. There can be elegance in such comparative modesty. Allow us a quiet, speculative whisper. Or, these are not claims so much as imaginative probes, offered in a voice that knows how to lower its volume when certainty is thin. We treat each speculation like a pebble placed on a map, visible, modest, and quickly recoverable. We also consider intention expressed through maintenance. People repair what they value. If terraces show signs of recutting or patchwork, that persistence would signal ongoing human relationship with place, a narrative of return rather than abandonment. The idea of recurrent tending is a warm thought, that hands return seasonally to smooth a worn edge, to replace a loose stone, to keep thresholds useful. This image carries with it a comforting continuity, small acts that span generations. Finally, let us root ourselves in the body. Visualize your hands resting in your lap. Flex the fingers slowly and notice the small motor memory of touch. Imagine those hands shaping stone, pressing level, rubbing a face smooth. Imagine that tactile rhythm transferred through time into the terraces beneath our imagined toes. With this image, take a long, slow breath in and let it go as if releasing a pebble into deep water. We keep the human-made interpretation as a kindly companion to the other hypotheses, not victorious, not diminished, simply present. The thought of hands making margins feels like a benediction. People leave traces because they loved utility and beauty in equal measure. We hold that thought with gentleness and continue, attentive and unhurried, to the next horizon of our inquiry. We will carry this possibility forward with patient curiosity and the quiet regard of friends visiting an old familiar room. We stand at the harbor's lip in the company of voices softened by salt and years. The island remembers practical things. Nets mended at dusk, the particular rhythm of a boat thunking against its mooring, a woman calling a child below the wind. These memories sit lightly in the air like breath. Local sea lore arrives as a slow, oral tide. Fishermen speak of banks that shift and of sandbars that arrive and depart like intermittent guests. Elders recall channels that ran differently in their grandparents' time. Their language is not technical but attuned. The sea pulled here, the headland sank a little. There was a step once where the water was thin. Such phrases are not proof, but they are testimony of attention, repeated across generations until they acquire the gravity of a map. Imagine, with us, a harbor at evening. Nets spread like folded cloth, the smell of drying seaweed. A low kettle simmering on a small stove in a fisher's hut. A child runs her palm along the rail of a boat, leaving a trail of salt that crystallizes in slow, patient patterns. These images are not exotic. They are domestic and thus enduring. They give the monument a human echo. Island memories also contain ritual. There are stories of offerings cast to particular edges of sea, of ceremonies timed to currents that bring certain fish. A shrine, perhaps, once stood on a promontory, or a marker stone guided small craft through a confusing approach. When communities live with an edge, they narrate it in mind and in practice. We hear those rituals as soft, repeated acts that bind people to place. Sometimes the local accounts carry small, precise recollections. A rope ladder fixed to a quay, A cluster of storage jars moved up from a low platform. The habit of tying a flag to a post so that returning boats might find shelter. These recalls matter because they show how attention is practical. People adapt to marginal changes rather than always remark on them. A community remembers by doing. We must be gentle with these memories, for they are stories shaped by necessity and affection, not by the strict filters of instrumentation. They are valuable in a different register. They are the scale of life. A farmer's note that the tide reached the oak's roots more often than I used to see is as important in its way as a sonar blip. It tells us how human habit encountered change. Language carries tenderness. Listen to the particular cadences used on the island. Half sentences trailing off, musical consonants softened by humidity, laughter that acts as punctuation. Such vocal textures are as much part of the place as stone. They sediment in memory like shells and sand. When we allow ourselves to hear these cadences, we are invited to consider the monument not only as a problem to be solved, but as a living feature inside ongoing human story. There are small acts of remembering performed by material culture too. Slip a finger beneath an old rope on a quay and you will find the smell of hands. Set a pot upon a ledge and it takes on the trace of 100 meals. Objects accumulate use as much as history. In the terraces' recesses, the imagined accumulation of minor utensils and traces is a soft catalogue of habit. We should also attend to the ways stories change slightly with each telling. One fisher will say, "It was this wide." Another will say, "No, it was that deep." And both speak from their own perspective. Oral traditions are democratic in that way. They welcome variance rather than seeking unanimity. We accept this variation as evidence of engagement rather than error. It is important to note how local custodianship shapes access. Islanders sometimes act as quiet stewards, discouraging reckless curiosity and asking that dives be conducted with respect. Their interventions can be modest, a rope to mark a sensitive area, an informal rota of divers, but they embody an ethic of care. Such practices are themselves a kind of living archaeology, community measures that preserve both place and story. Imagine now the soundscape of these memories, the creak of a wooden oar, a child's distant song, the murmur of voices over tea, the animal shuffle of dogs on stone. Let these sounds settle in your chest like small stones, solid and reassuring. Feel your own breathing lengthen. Notice the warmth of your hands and let them rest. The island's memories fold into our own attention, and in that folding there is a quiet companionship that steadies the mind. We close this section in the manner of a gentle hearth, a final, soft line that names belonging rather than ownership. The monument is as much a keeper of local stories as the sea is keeper of shells. We join the islands remembering not as claimants, but as listeners, and in that listening our presence is small, respectful, and grateful. Stay here a moment longer, feeling the quiet weight of belonging settle at the base of the skull, and let the soft buoyancy of the sea cradle our thoughts into a more patient rhythm. We hold these island voices with the same gentleness we bring to shells and old books and settle quietly. We gather now in a small, temperate chorus of voices, the geologist's measured cadence, the archaeologist's careful caveat, the diver's close-breathed astonishment, and listen as if to a conversation held by candlelight. Each voice offers a single sentence, and we let those sentences sit beside one another without forcing resolution. A geologist will speak of joints and stress fields, of bedding planes that favor rectangular breaks, and of the patient choreography of fracture and wave. He, or she, names processes with the deliberate calm of someone reading a slow ledger. Fractures propagate, salt pries open seams, and over seasons planes unfurl. The language is precise and low, and its effect is to widen our sense of time. We feel epic slide beneath the terraces like a very broad hand. An archaeologist replies with tempered excitement. Perhaps there is patterning that aligns with human scale. Perhaps certain plains coincide with thresholds seen in small coastal settlements elsewhere. The archaeologist gestures toward comparison, to pottery sherds found nearby, to cultural analogs that make a habit of flattening edges for use. There is no triumph in the tone, only a scholarly hunger to match object to gesture. Divers contribute a different intimacy, the soft hiss of breath through a regulator, the fingertip that reads stone as if reading Braille. Their testimony is tactile and immediate. They describe the give of silt, the hush of cavities, the small animal life that fills niches. A diver might say, quietly, "This step feels like a step," and their sentence carries the authority of embodied knowledge. We interleave these voices with small, auditory markers. The soft intake of breath before a measurement is reported, a page turn when an old report is consulted, the faint clicking of instruments being set. These are not theatrics. They are the living punctuation of careful thought. Measurements matter. A trench cut in a controlled setting, a series of sample cores, a sonar profile repeated at differing tides. These are the instruments of modern modesty. When a team reports a consistent right angle across multiple transects, we listen. When another team shows that jointing can produce similar angles under certain lithologies, we listen again. Both sets of facts are not opponents, but parts of a single, more complex truth. Methodology deserves a moment of gratitude. The scientific method is less a hammer than a lantern. It illuminates details that can be further checked, questioned, and revised. One group may prefer in situ observation with divers. Another may rely on remote sensing to avoid disturbing fragile surfaces. Each method has its music. The diver's breath is low and human. The sonar's ping is mechanical and precise. We prefer both instruments when they are used with care. There are gentle debates we can describe without heat. One camp emphasizes the regularity of edges as evidence of shaping, noting the repetition and human scale. Another camp demonstrates how rock under certain stresses can cleave into terrace-like forms, showing diagrams where natural joints step down like the folds of a quiet skirt. Neither stance is fixed. Both are revisions in a long conversation about what counts as evidence. We might pause here and allow ourselves a scholar's aside. Certainty is often the refuge of haste. Nuance is the companion of patience. We therefore treat every claim as provisional and every footnote as sacred. There is a warmth in being allowed to be curious without the pressure of finality. Personal anecdotes pepper the debate. I recall a diver who, after a long descent, came up trembling with the small shock of recognition. "It felt like walking where my grandmother walked," he said, and then corrected himself, laughing softly at the sentiment. Such statements are not data in the formal sense, but they are important. They record human relation to place, the ways in which bodies remember steps even when maps forget them. Let us also honor the quiet corrections that science makes to itself. Resampling, peer review, the slow publication that is more like a procession than a banner. When an initial claim is reevaluated after further measurement, we do not see failure, but the very mechanism by which knowledge refines itself. The debate, then, is not a contest so much as a communal tending. We bring our attention now, briefly and bodily, into the present. Feel the length of your spine, and let your chest soften. Notice the rhythm of your breathing, small and regular. Match it, for a few cycles, to the imagined gentle back and forth of these voices. This physical alignment steadies the mind as the arguments settle into an attentive pause. In the end, the chorus agrees on one thing. The terraces reward slow looking. They are patient interlocutors that demand method, humility, and return. We keep the debates not as obstructions, but as invitations to further care. And so we set these voices down like stones on a low table, each labeled gently, kept for later reading. We carry their music with us as a soft background as we move toward closer observation, allowing method to be our lantern and wonder to be the quiet fuel that keeps it lit. We leave the debate like a lamp left in a window, its light modest and steady for those who return and always returning. We let the years widen now, not counting them, not arranging them, simply letting them unfurl like a slow banner in a gentle current. The terraces of Yonaguni sit beneath us as if they have always been there, and perhaps, in a way, they have, not because they are eternal, but because time moves differently when water bears the weight of memory. There is a kind of silence particular to places that have passed through many eras without needing to announce themselves. It is not the silence of forgetting, but the silence of having been shaped by forces so patient that they no longer distinguish between a decade and 1,000 years. This is the silence we enter now. Imagine resting a hand along one of the wide plains of stone. The water cushions the contact, softening edges that would feel sharper in air. You do not think of centuries or hypotheses or the small debates we set aside earlier. Instead, your mind drifts toward a sensation more elemental: coolness, breath, the faint give of silt stirred by a slow current. The terrace receives your attention without asking for interpretation. We move along the surface as if strolling through an unlit library. Stone shelves rise and fall around us, each one a chapter in the long, unhurried book of geological time. We do not read these chapters directly. We brush past them, letting their presence accumulate like a soft weight on the chest, grounding, steadying, almost like the feeling of a warm blanket laid across a sleeping body. In this long quiet, our pace slows further. Sentences narrow to simple shapes. Thoughts stretch out until their beginnings and endings almost touch. We drift rather than walk. We hover rather than decide. The monument accommodates this shift with a dignity that feels older than the theories that surround it. It allows us to unthink without losing awareness, a gentle mode of being where attention is open but unburdened. You may notice now how the water dims. Light from the surface filters in as pale gold, then soft granite blue. It moves like the faint turning of pages in a book someone reads long after the world has gone to sleep. We trace the gradient downward, our bodies becoming quieter as the palette deepens. This soft shading is its own kind of timekeeping. The deeper the blue, the slower the mind. Even the fish here behave as if on some older schedule. They drift in unhurried diagonals, pausing over recesses and alcoves that look almost like stone benches. Their movements hold no urgency, only the small, instinctive recognitions that living things make with spaces older than their species. Watching them, we feel the last residues of wakefulness float outward and dissolve. There is, beneath everything, a simple truth: water remembers pressure, not stories. It presses gently against the monument, year after year, night after night, smoothing edges, carrying grains, settling silt. This pressure is the soft language in which time writes here. If we listen to it, not with the mind's cleverness, but with the body's quieter intelligence, we can sense how long durations fold into one another. Perhaps this is why the terraces foster sleep. Not because they are mysterious, though they are, not because they are beautiful, though they surely are, but because they invite us into a scale of time that is too large for worry to survive. Worry is a creature of narrow minutes. Here, among these broad, mute plains, minutes widen until worry cannot hold its shape. We drift to a broad platform now, its edges softened by long familiarity with tide and season. We settle here as though resting on a low step. Imagine lowering your weight onto the stone, though you remain suspended by water. Imagine the water adjusting to cradle you, distributing pressure evenly across your back, your shoulders, the arches of your feet. The body takes this cue and releases something small, a tension you did not know you had kept. Breathe with the water. Slow in, slow out. Let the exhale travel a little longer than the inhale, as though it were a ribbon unfurling, toward the seafloor. Each breath is a kind of conversation with the quiet that surrounds us. With each cycle, you sink not deeper in distance, but deeper in ease. There is no need to conclude anything here. The monument has no preference for our interpretations. It does not lean toward the geologist or the archaeologist or the dreamer. It accommodates all three with equal, indifferent generosity. This neutrality becomes calming, like a wide sky that asks nothing in return for its openness. We linger in this neutrality. We savor it. We let it wash over us like a second tide. The terraces beneath us become less like structures and more like a mood, stable, low, expansive. The edges soften in our perception until the entire space feels like one extended exhale. The mind follows, easing into a state where the border between thought and rest becomes thin. As the last traces of surface brightness dim into a cool, blended blue, we feel our awareness grow lighter. The monument remains steady below, the water holds us without effort, and time itself elongates like a held note. We drift in this note for a while, unmeasured, unhurried. Then, gently, we allow the scene to linger but not sharpen. We keep ourselves here, in this long quiet of unthinking time, until the body signals readiness to move on, a readiness that will come softly, like a tide returning to a familiar shoreline. We begin our slow walk, or what feels like a walk, by letting our bodies hover just above the first long step. The water steadies us, carrying most of our weight so that what remains is merely intention, the idea of placing one quiet foot before the other. Down here, movement is never abrupt. It is softened, cushioned, given time to bloom and time to fade. Every gesture becomes a thought stretched into a slow, gentle arc. Ahead of us, the terrace extends like a great stone table, its surface coated in a thin nap of silt that drifts upward at the slightest disturbance. When we lower what feels like a foot, the mind's foot, the dreamer's foot, the silt rises in a little cloud, then disperses again, settling in slow spirals. Watching these spirals is like tracing the path of smoke in still air, hypnotic, patternless, deeply soothing. A faint pulse of light glides across the plain. It arrives from above, having passed through meters of water where waves refracted into soft braids and ribbons. These ribbons slide across the stone like fingers brushing a quiet keyboard. They move from left to right, then gather in a shimmer that dissolves before forming again. We slow ourselves to match their tempo, unhurried, tidal, naturally drowsy. We approach the edge of the terrace. Edges underwater have a gentler character than edges in air. They do not confront but reveal. Here, the drop is only a meter or two, but the shift in light makes it feel deeper, as though the stone were descending into a memory rather than a lower step. We drift one moment more, then allow ourselves to float down, the water doing the work of descent. Our bodies sink as though we were feathers settling on a cushion. A narrow groove runs along this step. Not deep, not sharp, just enough of a line to catch a thread of light. We trace it with a fingertip. The rock is cool, smooth in places, slightly grainy in others. Small clusters of marine growth cling to the groove, moving with the subtle sway of the current. Their motion is barely perceptible but steady, like the faint breathing of a creature asleep. Tiny sounds rise around us, not loud enough to draw attention, only to fill the space with a soft sense of life. A shrimp snaps, so faint it seems almost imaginary. A distant school of small fish ticks by with a series of microscopic pulses. These microsounds strike the stone, the water, and our bodies as though we are inside a great slow instrument tuned to lull. We continue. The terrace widens, then narrows again, shaped by time and long syllables rather than sudden changes. Each new plane welcomes us with the same calm geometry. A notch here, a ridge there. The features appear and dissolve gently as we move, like hills glimpsed through fog. The absence of urgency is complete. We wander without aim, guided only by curiosity softened into drowsiness. Near the far edge, a flat expanse supports a beautiful accumulation of fine, shimmering sand. It is arranged by currents into faint ripples, each so delicate it could be mistaken for brushwork. We hover above it, watching as the smallest eddies of our presence rearrange a grain or two. Even this tiny motion feels like part of a long ritual, the sea shaping, reshaping, reminding itself that nothing rests entirely, even in stillness. To our left, another channel opens. It appears almost like a hallway, straight, long, shadowed toward its center. We float into it slowly. The walls rise on either side, softened right angles, faces made smooth by passing seasons. In places, the rock holds tiny pits where trapped bubbles quiver like silver beads. You can touch one with a fingertip and watch it tremble, then slide upward in a lazy spiral, vanishing somewhere far above. Inside this channel, sound changes. It becomes slightly more enclosed, as though we are listening from within cupped hands. Our exhale feels warmer. The pulse of water is steadier and deeper, echoing in rounded tones. We pause here, letting the space wrap itself around us. A gentle chamber, quiet but not empty, like the inside of a shell. We rest one imagined hand against the right wall. The stone is colder here, the water slower. Tiny organisms cling to the surface, soft fronds, minute tendrils, almost invisible except when the light grazes them at a certain angle. Their movement is so slow it resembles thought rather than motion. We find ourselves matching their pace without effort. When we leave the channel, we drift up onto another plateau. This one is smaller and gently sloped. The slope guides our bodies forward without needing to decide. The terrace rises into a shallow corner where debris has collected, a few shells, a pale feather-like spine, grains of sand arranged in a crescent. Nothing here is dramatic. Everything is tender, quiet, offering itself in miniature. We kneel, or the underwater equivalent of kneeling, to inspect a ridge along the plateau's center. Running a hand along it feels like reading braille written by geology. Bumps, grooves, soft dips, formed by millennia of small events. Here, the stone gives slightly as a layer of silt cushions the curve. There, the stone reappears in its bare form, smooth and worn. The contrast between the two textures brings awareness back into the fingertips, then diffuses it gently outward until the whole body seems to exhale. A soft current nudges us forward. Not strong, just persuasive. It is the kind of motion that encourages rather than directs, like a friend lightly touching your shoulder to remind you it's time to move on. We follow it, slowly, feeling our limbs drift into the current's long, quiet rhythm. As we reach the far edge, we pause once more. From here, the terraces extend into deeper blue, step after step, form after form, fading incrementally into a shadowed calm. We do not need to follow them all. It is enough to stand on this border between the known and the gently unseen. The water cools slightly. The light grows thin. The monument seems to breathe with us. We allow our awareness to settle onto this last terrace. No questions to answer. No puzzles to solve. Only the stone beneath us, the water around us, the steady, softened cadence of breath, and the feeling that the world has slowed to match our resting pace. When you are ready, we will drift onward. But for now, we remain here, on this quiet step, held by the sea, guided by nothing but calm. There is a moment, subtle, almost imperceptible, when the quiet of the monument begins to feel like something shared. Not a place we observe from a distance, but a presence that acknowledges us with the gentlest awareness. As we remain on the terrace, the water around us feels warmer, as though it is folded slightly closer, recognizing that our breath has slowed, that our attention has softened into a calmer shape. Melancholy arrives first, not as sorrow but as a soft ache, a recognition of time's long drift. It moves through the water like a faint ripple, barely enough to stir the silt, yet enough to be felt in the chest. We sense, without words, the vastness of years that have settled here, storms that have come and gone, currents that have reshaped edges, moments that once existed above the water and now lie gently below it. The ache is tender, not sharp. It asks nothing of us except to notice that time has a texture, and down here it feels cool and patient. We sit with that feeling, letting it pool around us. The stone beneath us has seen more seasons than we can imagine, yet it does not hurry us. The water has carried countless stories, yet it does not demand we understand them. Everything is quiet, unhurried, open. In this slowness, melancholy softens further until it becomes almost indistinguishable from calm. Into that softened space, wonder rises. Wonder here is not the bright, electric kind that startles or excites. It is more like a lantern lit behind a curtain, glowing gently, illuminating shapes rather than sharp details. It moves through the terraces with a quiet grace, touching the ridges, the channels, the stepped plains. Every surface seems to hum with the idea that something remarkable happened here once, even if the monument will never say exactly what. We feel the wonder not as a question, but as a sensation, a widening, a warmth along the ribs, a small lift in the breath. It is the wonder of being allowed to witness something so old, so uninsistent, that it has ceased trying to explain itself. The kind of wonder that invites rest rather than investigation. The kind that wraps around the listener gently and says, "You do not need to know everything to feel deeply connected." And beneath the melancholy and the wonder, something else begins to move: companionship. Perhaps it comes from the steadiness of the stone, or the way the water holds us as though cradling a thought that needs gentleness. Perhaps it rises simply because we have walked these terraces together, step by step, breath by breath, without rushing or demanding conclusions. Whatever its origin, the feeling grows quietly, a sense that we are not alone here. The monument feels like a companion, silent, yes, but not distant. The sea, too, feels like a companion, patient, rhythmic, offering us its slow heartbeat as a reminder that the world continues in calm cycles far beyond our waking concerns. Even our own breath feels companionable now, each exhale a soft agreement with the water's pulse. There is a comfort in that shared stillness, a comfort in knowing that the mystery does not push us away but invites us to linger, a comfort in recognizing that solitude underwater is never empty. It is full of gentle presences, each folded into the other like waves layering upon waves. We allow these emotional undercurrents to settle around us, the melancholy like a cool thread, the wonder like a faint glow, the companionship like warmth across the shoulders. None of them are loud. None of them insist. They drift through us, steady and slow, deepening the restfulness of this moment. If you listen carefully, the water seems to echo them back. A low hum beneath the terrace, a faint chime of shifting grains, the muted whisper of your own exhale moving outward. These small sounds form a kind of emotional soundscape, an underwater lullaby that carries the weight of years and the softness of the present in equal measure. As our awareness softens further, the world seems to tilt toward rest. The water grows quieter. The monument feels more like a friend leaning close. Even the light seems to dim into a gentler palette, as though dusk has arrived underwater just for us. We sit here in that calm convergence, melancholy, wonder, companionship, and let it settle into the deepest part of the breath. Nothing pulls at us now. Nothing sharp remains. Only the soft gravity of rest drawing us gradually, inevitably, toward quiet. The time comes, softly as a tide shifting under moonlight, when we turn away from the monument, not in haste, not in any gesture of leaving something behind, but in the quiet manner of travelers who know that companionship does not require possession. We let our gaze rest one last time upon the stepped stone beneath us, its softened corners, its patient planes, It's slow conversation with the sea, and we breathe with it, long and low, letting the water fill the spaces between thoughts. There is no need for conclusions here, none at all. The sea has never insisted on them. The stone has never asked us to choose. And so we allow ourselves the same grace. We let the questions remain where they are, like small, unlit lanterns waiting along an ancient path, gentle markers rather than destinations. As we begin to drift backward, the water gathers around our shoulders with a careful touch, a cool, steadying palm that guides rather than urges. Our movements are slow, our limbs suspended in the hush of buoyancy. Even our breaths loosen into longer shapes, each inhale widening the chest just enough, each exhale melting into the surrounding blue, as though the sea itself is breathing with us. We notice how the soundscape narrows now. The distant currents dim to a murmur. The faint shimmer of silt becomes a soft, grainy whisper, and somewhere far above, a single muted chime seems to toll, not as a call or a farewell, but as an acknowledgement. You came, you listened, and now you may rest. Our bodies feel different here. We can sense the comfort in the spine as it lengthens slightly, the gentle release along the shoulders, the way our hands drift without effort at our sides. The monument remains beneath us, but the weight of needing to understand it has dissolved into the wider water. We have become part of its quiet, and it has become part of ours. It is a curious fact, one that scholars rarely state outright, that some mysteries soothe more deeply when we stop trying to resolve them. That in the absence of answers, a new kind of closeness opens. Not the closeness of comprehension, but of companionship. We feel that now, as the terraces recede into softer outlines, a sense that the monument is not lost to us, nor we to it. We carry a shared pause, a shared quiet, a shared moment in time that no tide can entirely erase. The water around us darkens by a shade, as if dimming the lanterns of thought one by one. Our breath falls into a slower rhythm. Our pulse steadies, and we sense, with gentle certainty, that we have reached the part of the journey where the mind naturally lets go. No final answers, only the soft comfort of knowing they are unnecessary. We feel the presence of the monument like a warm memory behind us, lingering without clinging. Its silhouette folds into the blue. Its edges blur. Its riddles drift into a quieter register. And we, patient, buoyant, rise just slightly toward a place where light thins and thoughts loosen. The sea seems to nod around us, a slow undulation of acceptance. There is nothing left to prove, nothing left to catalog, nothing left to ponder with sharp edges. Only the lingering warmth of shared curiosity, softened now into rest. Only the gentle companionship between us and the water, between the listener and the drifting quiet. We let our attention relax, first around the terraces, then around the wide field of water, then around the inward spaces of breath. Each release feels like a small door closing softly in the deep, until the world becomes a hushed, expansive chamber of calm. In this settling quiet, we offer gratitude to the stone, to the sea, and to the long patience of time, and we turn inward, ready to let the last traces of wakefulness dissolve. We let the last traces of daylight slip away from us now, letting them fold into the widening blue that deepens just beneath our ribs, where our breath rises and settles in its own quiet tide. And once more we feel how the water holds us, calmly, patiently, like an old friend who knows exactly how gently to place a hand upon our shoulder. In this softened dark, the monument becomes less an object and more a presence, looming in no way at all, simply resting in its shape, its age, its unhurried story. And as we drift alongside it, we sense its willingness to keep watch for us, and standing at the edge of time, murmuring nothing more than reassurance. We breathe with it, slow, steady, and shared. Each inhale meeting the faint inward pull of the tide, each exhale settling like dust upon the terraces, where tiny silt motes hover in the dimness, drifting with such unhurried grace that they seem to model the very pace we have longed for all day. Even our thoughts begin to float, rising and falling in loose spirals, never quite forming edges, just soft shapes, like half-remembered shells at the bottom of a tidal pool, shapes that come and go as they please, and we follow them not out of effort, but out of curiosity, the gentlest curiosity one can feel while on the cusp of sleep. A small ribbon of light threads down through the water above us, and though it has no fixed intention, no direction it must point toward, it spreads itself across the terraces in a way that comforts rather than illuminates, the way moonlight comforts the surface of a quiet lake. We drift a little closer, letting our fingers hover just above the stone, not needing to touch, simply knowing it is there, steady and cool and older than anything we can name. We feel the faint pressure of the water against our arms, its softness, its slow insistence that we release the last pockets of tension we carry in our shoulders, our jaw, the space behind our eyes. And so we do. We let the monument breathe for us for a moment. Each slow pulse of the sea pressing inward, then drawing away, as though the world itself has shifted into a cradle made of water. Our attention loosens, draping itself across the terraces without needing to fix on any single line or angle. In this final descent, details dissolve, edges blur, distinctions slip away like tide lines smoothed overnight, and the monument, stripped of its puzzle and its debates, becomes simply a companion, one who keeps us company here at the threshold between awareness and rest. A soft current curls beneath us, a whisper of motion that rocks us gently. It reminds us of small boats tethered at harbor, swaying in patient rhythm, and we feel ourselves sway with them, drifting between thoughts with no need to anchor anywhere at all. Somewhere far above, the waves press their palms lightly against the surface, and that soft pressure, though we cannot hear it clearly, reaches us as calm, as assurance, as the promise that the world is at rest, and so we may rest as well. We let our breathing become very slow now, almost imperceptible, almost borrowed from the sea itself. And in that slowed rhythm, inhale with the faint, inward pull of the tide. Exhale with the soft outward hush. We feel the monument leaning closer, not physically, but in presence, offering us the quiet it has known for thousands of years. Not silence, but quiet. Quiet with depth, quiet with patience, quiet that holds space for us to loosen our grip and feel how light we really are. We imagine a final silt mote drifting downward, slower than slow, taking its time, spiraling as though guided by unseen fingers, and as we watch it descend, we sense our own thoughts descending as well, settling lower, growing softer, losing the need to complete their shapes. Everything is ease now, the terraces dim and warm, the water around us a gentle blanket, the world above dissolving into distant memory. We feel the last strands of the day letting go, one by one, untying themselves without our instruction. We rest in the dim presence of the monument, and the monument rests in us, and nothing more is required. Not interpretation, not conclusion, not certainty. Only this, a shared quiet, a shared drifting, a shared surrender to the slow, the soft, the ancient, the kind. The terraces blur into a single soothing plain. The current becomes a long exhale, and our breath becomes a whisper that belongs as much to the sea as to us. And so we offer the final gentle phrases, phrases meant not for thinking, but for floating, each followed by a long settling pause, inviting the mind to slip into the deepening dark with no expectation. We drift together now. We rest beside the old stone. We follow the slow tide inward. We let the day fall away. We sink into quiet. We sleep,